Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lot going on today, a lot going on this week. I wish I could say it was all good, but we spent till 10 p.m. night before last working on bills that would find ways to take people's guns away and unfortunately not give them the kind of due process that we think the Constitution affords people. And as during my days as, well, prosecutor and as a felony judge, thousands of criminal cases went through my court. I don't remember anywhere a criminal defendant bought his gun at a sporting goods store, gun store, applied for a gun, and that's not the way criminals work. And so I didn't see anything in our hours and hours and hours of committee hearings, trying to amend with good amendments bad bills that the majority didn't allow to be passed. We thought they might be joining us on some. They said they would look at some, but basically defeated every amendment. But today, we met in Judiciary Committee at 8 a.m. To take up what sort-of, kind of a bit of a impeachment resolution. We had amendments that would have made a bad resolution a little better. Still not good, but we had a hard time figuring out on the Republican side, what is this? It sounds like in Texas we would say we're fixing to do something. And a lot of times people say, I'm fixing to do that, but it means it may get put off and I may not really be serious, because if I was really serious, I'd do it right now. But this resolution, and I have it here, the first paragraph talks about the committee making discovery requests, but the second paragraph is really the one that deals with allegations that would be an impeachable offense or offenses. At least it's supposed to. And so it says, whereas Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report released on April 18, 2019 found that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Okay, but the Mueller report made very, very clear, and those who investigated, I thought, made it very clear there was no collusion, or to use the legal term, conspiracy by anyone in the Trump campaign with the Russian government. None. That part didn't happen, even though we have networks like CNN and MSNBC, and I don't know who all else, but for 2 or 3 years they've talked about the crimes of this president and their collusion with Russia. Well, when people that have law degrees talked about collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, that immediately sent up red flags with me, because collusion is not a legal term that's used in talking about crimes. It's conspiracy. And so it immediately begins to raise questions Are they really serious about some type of crime? Because if they were, they would use words that are used in criminal terminology. But here, this is a completely deceptive allegation when it comes to President Trump, because they take this initial allegation and say, yeah, Mueller found that the Russians really were trying to interfere in our 2016 election. Okay, but it didn't involve anybody in the Trump campaign. That was clear. So they try to brush over that and make it sound like, yeah, even though there was nobody, President Trump or the Trump campaign, that were involved at all, but we're going to kind of word this, put it in the same sentence so that it kind of sounds like, yeah, the President Trump was involved with Russia. Because then it jumps into another gear. It says, and that there were at least 10 separate episodes of President Trump using his official powers to, and here's the word, thwart or attempt to thwart the Special Counsel's investigation. And that's also very, very troubling language for those of us that have dealt with legal terminology in criminal cases. I don't know of anybody that's dealt with criminal cases, I didn't hear from anybody on the committee, that has ever heard of a crime involving thwarting. No, we're familiar with obstruction of justice, but these are the kind of games you play with words when you know, yeah, there's no evidence a crime was committed, but maybe if we use different terminology, it'll sound like some kind of bad crime was committed, and clearly we're not going to be able to remove a president from office with the Senate understanding that even the Mueller report, even the Mueller Special Counsel team that had all these people that hated Donald Trump, they still couldn't find anything that would be indictable. Now some say, well, but there was obstruction of justice. We even had one, I would say, incompetent law professor come before our committee and say she could guarantee that she could get a conviction and win on appeal. Well, I tried enough cases in state and federal court and in the Army that I know, and I've told people that were looking for lawyers, my days as a judge, I couldn't recommend a lawyer, but I would warn people, if you ever hear a lawyer who tries cases who says they can guarantee you a win in a trial, then that lawyer is either totally incompetent or is one of the bigger liars in the legal profession. I don't know which one this professor was. I got the impression she just really didn't know what she was talking about, because nobody makes that kind of swear, oh yeah, I can guarantee you, you're going to, I can win this case at trial and on appeal. That's not a good lawyer. That's somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about. But especially when you look, what we have found now, after thousands and thousands of interviews, subpoenas, documents, millions of documents, there was no crime. And the reason there was no obstruction of justice by President Trump or anybody that was assisting him is because the president made very, very clear as soon as he heard about some collusion, conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, with Russia to rig the election, he knew he never colluded. He knew that he never conspired, nor did anybody in his campaign conspire with Russia to affect the election. That never happened, and he knew it. But he could see from what these 17 or so people on the Special Counsel team were trying to do, they were trying to frame him. And this guy that was dishonored and was no longer respected by MI6 that he used to work for in England, and there was information that he was discredited, not just his information, but he had been discredited. But that's who was hired by Fusion GPS, that was hired apparently by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee to try to dredge up dirt on candidate Donald Trump so that they could rig the election against Donald Trump. And we've gotten to the bottom of it almost, and we know that Christopher Steele is the one that didn't just collude, he conspired with people in Russia who he ultimately had to admit, yeah, it's quite possible they could have been working for Vladimir Putin. So Christopher Steele, it appears most likely he was the one that was conspiring with people from Russia, sounds like Putin's agents, to try to destroy Donald Trump. And there's been noise made about, oh, gee, Russia really wanted Donald Trump to win. That's not the way Vladimir Putin thinks. He wants the old Soviet empire back. It really bugs me when educated people say, he's such a complicated guy. No, he isn't. He's one of the most easily discernible people in the world. He wants the old empire back. He's a former KGB guy, and he will do whatever it takes to try to get it back. I don't think he cared so much who won the election. He wanted to divide America, and lo and behold, he was able to see that GPS, Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele, the Clinton campaign, DNC, they were able to take all this information that were nothing but lies in the dossier. They've even given dossier a bad name, and divide America. And at least one political party in America has been totally willing to be complicit to help divide America over a bunch of lies in a dossier that was created as political fodder when it became very clear very quickly to those who had paid for the dossier that it was not only not verifiable, the person that gathered the information didn't really know the people, the Russians that gave him the lies about Donald Trump, and that got taken before a FISA court to get a warrant to spy on a campaign, to wit, the Trump campaign. That's scary stuff. When one administration can use the powers of the office of president, the intel community, the FBI, the Department of Justice, use all those powers to destroy another campaign. And as Newt Gingrich has pointed out, if Ms. Clinton had won, we would never have known how corrupted and weaponized the DOJ, FBI had become. And I know there's some of my friends here in Congress that on our side of the aisle that they think David Horowitz is doing a good job because look at all the evidence of wrongdoing, bias, all this that he's found. Well, you look at the most recent report, just like the first one, The first report, Horowitz found, and he was a good Obama appointee as Inspector General there at the Department of Justice, good Democrat, good appointee. And so he does his digging, finds hundreds of pages of the most outrageous political bias, actually personal hatred for Donald Trump, an absolute love and affection for candidate Hillary Clinton, and so much bias, overwhelming, and every conclusion that these biased, prejudiced, bigoted investigators had was 100% consistent with all of their conclusions. That speaks for itself. Now, if a third, half of their conclusions had gone against their bias and prejudice, bigotry, then you would say, well, you know, maybe it really didn't affect the outcomes of their investigations. But when every conclusion is consistent with the bias and prejudice, even though it's clear, like in the case of the investigation into the Clinton emails, you had Strzok and Page examining emails, and they were making the calls on whether documents are classified, knowing full well if they said something was classified, that Hillary Clinton was being set up legitimately to be indicted and convicted. So they wanted Hillary Clinton to win. They wanted to do whatever they could to stop Donald Trump from winning, and if he didn't win, as they said, they needed an insurance policy, you know, just in case he won. And Horowitz did a grave injustice within the Justice Department when he says there's no indication that all that bias had anything to do with the outcomes of the cases. That's just garbage. He was being disingenuous. He wasn't doing his job in his conclusions. And I know there were a lot of Republicans who said, yeah, okay, but boy, when he investigated, when that report comes out on Comey, it's going to end up sending him to prison. Well, Comey did leak information that he should not. He did keep documents that he was not permitted to keep. He secreted them, kept them after he had left government service. He's not allowed to do that. And the biggest thing about those, and whether or not they were felonies that would put him in jail, was this information classified, at what level? And we find out, you know, page 1 and 2 of the Horowitz IG report, the FBI investigated, the FBI determined that this wasn't classified, the FBI this and that, and you have to wait 40 pages to see who he means by the FBI. Well, it turns out the two most important people, because they had the most experience in analyzing documents to determine their classification level, it was a couple named Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. And he has the gall, Horowitz does, to even point out, to try to give more credibility to Strzok and Page's work on deciding whether Comey should go to prison because they were classified at a high level. He said, oh, but they had more experience because they did all this work on the Clinton email, determining whether those were classified or not. For heaven's sake, somebody needs to wake up. David Horowitz does not need to be doing the investigation. Maybe let him do the investigation, but he doesn't need to be doing the reports. A lot of places, people would say he doesn't know sic 'em from come here when it comes to proper conclusions. It's outrageous. And he justifies not having them re-examined because time was of the essence 2 years ago in 2017, back before Strzok and Page were fired. But not to worry, because a guy named Bill Priestap was going to rubber stamp whatever Strzok and Page decided on classifications. There was another unit chief, didn't give us that name. That tells you something right there. But Priestap was supposed to have a final decision. Apparently rubber stamp whatever our experienced Strzok and Page decided, when they knew full well if they classified things at a certain level, then it meant Jim Comey was going to prison. So they did Comey a favor, and so then Horowitz, he didn't want to have them re-reviewed for proper classification away from the bias of Strzok and Page and Priestap, that, you know, there were reports of him going to London trying to help out Steele's credibility. So Horowitz said time was of the essence, so nobody reconsidered the classification that the bigoted bias and prejudice of Page and Strzok would not be determinative. And I know that people, Republicans, many of them are saying, well, look, there's no question that McCabe lied, perjured, he should end up going to prison. But I'm telling you, as a history buff, historian, if you would, it's true. History is often the best indicator of what someone will do in the future. And the indications are that Obama's IG Horowitz will find some terrible things, but he will do it in such a way that he'll give not only Comey now and Strzok and Page a get out of jail free pass, but he'll do that with McCabe, he'll do that with anybody else he's investigating, because that's his history. He knows which side of his bread is buttered and who's doing the buttering, who got him in the position he was in. And so we end up now being told, well, this isn't a formal impeachment hearing and investigation we started today in judiciary. But then, toward the end of our hearing, we heard from two different Democrats that wanted to go on record and make it very, very clear that this was an impeachment hearing. It was an impeachment investigation, and that's what it is. It's not just a resolution for investigative procedures, as it says here on the resolution. But there was so much fraud involved in this case, and I'm not talking about from anybody with a Trump campaign. I'm talking about a guy like James Comey that should have known better, and he swore and apparently verified the application, affidavit information to go before the FISA court so he could get a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign, all while he was lying to the president about him not being under investigation, and also trying to set the president up by doing little memos. And I hope and pray one of the things that comes out of all this Department of Justice and FBI intel abuse is a practice the FBI has had for years. It's Section 302, where FBI agents, after they do an interview, they sit down and type up their own version of what they think or what they recall a witness said. And most of the ones I've seen over the years in my different roles in the justice system appear to be very accurate. But it's a problem when every other local and state law enforcement entity I'm aware of, when they want credibility for a statement, they record it. And I saw it from juries in my court that, look, you're telling us this is what the defendant said. Why didn't you record it so we could see for ourselves? We could hear for ourselves. We could see the body language. And that's why local governments all over the country have come up with billions of dollars altogether so that they can make sure that they get video and audio of someone being questioned, so there's no question what they say, but not at the FBI. Oh, no. No, they will talk to a witness, and then they write out their own version of what's said. And thankfully, most of them do a great job. But it also allows unscrupulous FBI or DOJ officials, as we've now seen existed under the Obama Justice Department, it allows them to twist the FBI or the DOJ's version of what a witness says and use that, as they have thousands and thousands, I don't know how many times, to convict people, saying this is what he said because I wrote it down in my own notes after I did the interview. Really? Well, let's see the video. Let's hear the audio. Oh, well, we don't do that at the FBI. We only write down our version of what's said because we really would rather you hear our version and not the defendant's version of what he said, because we get more credibility than any defendant. At least that used to be the way it was. But I hope one of the things that will come out of all of this is we'll be able, in order for the FBI to get back the credibility they used to have as the greatest law enforcement agency in the world, they're going to need to start doing audio and video so that we can see what a witness said, hear what they said for ourselves, and so that juries can hear that and judges can see and hear that. But we don't have that here. It's people like the biased Strzok Page, who hated Trump, love Hillary Clinton. You know, when you talk about obstruction of justice, I don't know how you could be more obstructive than to get a subpoena for emails and then take all of the stuff off so nobody can ever see them, and then beat up with hammers, cell phones, whatever you need to destroy the evidence. That would seem to be a classic case of obstruction. But fortunately for people involved with Hillary Clinton, it was Strzok and Page on the job, so they didn't see anything, didn't hear anything that might resemble something that should be prosecuted. But we end up today with this resolution that the majority passed without allowing any amendments, and they use this word, thwart, that the president used his official powers to thwart or attempt to thwart. Nobody's ever been convicted of thwarting. Just can imagine, say the Democrats got exactly what they wanted and they were able to impeach or charge President Trump with thwarting an official investigation, goes to the Senate, they get what they want, President Trump is removed. Years down the road, they say, you used to be president. You were removed? What were you removed for? Well, I was apparently a thwarter. I've been branded a thwarter. Maybe we ought to put a T on their head. Yeah, so everybody knows, here comes a thwarter. The only thing is, he was thwarting, if at all, massive injustice from the Justice Department. He knew he had not conspired with anybody in Russia, nor had anybody in his campaign, and the evidence has borne that out. Even Mueller, Weissman, the people that hated the president, had to come around to saying, yeah, okay, we can't find any evidence of them conspiring with Russia. But nonetheless, We still have to go through this hearing today, and I'm sure there will be other hearings. But the truth is, President Trump never obstructed or thwarted justice. He knew if there was true justice, this effort to frame him for colluding with the Russians would be found false and would be found to be a frame-up job. He wanted justice. You can never convict someone of obstructing justice when all they did was what they could to ensure that an injustice did not occur. They were seeking justice to make sure there wasn't a successful frame-up. That's not obstructing or thwarting justice. That's seeking justice. But there certainly were people inside the DOJ who were doing what they could to inflict an injustice on President Trump. So here we go into this impeachment exercise that started today. And I think about those in England that would say, God save the Queen, God save the King, God save this republic. We're in a lot of trouble when we have caught the Justice Department red-handed trying to impose a massive injustice, conspiring to do so, even having an acting Attorney General who we found out from the emails this week, and some of us knew this because we knew from other information, that Rosenstein, acting Attorney General, did not just once say sarcastically, I'll wear a wire. You know, I can get into the White House, I'll wear a wire and record the president, and then they could try to remove him under the 25th Amendment for not being competent. They formulated a response to act like he was being sarcastic when everybody there knew he was not being sarcastic, because apparently, from what I understood, the reason he brought that up is because others there in the meeting were mad at him. They said, you've been helping the president instead of helping us get the president. You know, you wrote that memo that gave him a basis to fire Comey. Whose side are you on? And that's the kind of context where Rosenstein says, look, I'll wear a wire if you want. He wanted to show that he was an Obama team player, a Sally Yates team player, a Loretta Lynch team player, that he was not a Trump team player. I'll even wear a wire, go in. And that wasn't the only place he brought it up. He brought it up at another meeting, such that McCabe went back and told people, you know, Rosenstein brought it up again. He still says he's willing to wear a wire. That's because Rosenstein was trying to convince him he was a good team player. And he would go set up and try to frame the president to help remove him from office. But that's not all that's going on this week. We had the vote today. The House has voted to eliminate the tiny, tiny little part of ANWR where Jimmy Carter said that drilling would be allowed. Now, this is Jimmy Carter that says everybody's supposed to wear a cardigan and turn your temperature in winter way down, wear a sweater, you know, shiver a little bit, it's okay, as we're going to save energy. But even he said, you're right, that part of ANWR, that tiny, tiny little part of that huge area, nothing's there. It's not going to affect any wildlife, really. So that can be an area that can be drilled. And then since then, Democrats have done all they could to put it off limits. And sometimes you see these pictures of all this wildlife, this beautiful area, pristine. Well, if that's what you see, that isn't a part of ANWR that where drilling would be allowed. And so we get a little perspective on the size, there was another poster up here somewhere. It has how big how big Alaska is, and then it has the size of ANWR, and then there's a red dot that you can't see more than a few feet away that is where the tiny little part, comparatively, where drilling would be allowed. And, you know, there are people here in this body, they're absolutely wonderful people, friends on both sides of the aisle. And there are some, my Democratic friends, I know they would never lie to me. They're just honest people. We just have disagreements on things. And one of the most honorable people I ever knew in this body was actually chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee back initially when Democrats took the majority in January of '07. And he wanted socialized medicine. We disagree on that. But I knew the man's heart. He wanted to help poor people. And that's why he didn't want to pass the cap and trade bill, because he knew it would cause the price of energy to skyrocket. And he knew it was a tough, tough blow to the nation's poor, to our senior citizens on Medicare, but especially on Social Security, fixed income. You start skyrocketing the price of energy to those folks is devastating. And that's why John did not want to pass the cap and trade bill. He wanted to do everything he could to help poor people. That was his nature. But he knew, you start doing this kind of stuff, you know, for the rich, energy prices, gasoline, electricity, propane, those things going up, it's an inconvenience. But those on fixed income, it's absolutely devastating. And so as America, under the Trump administration, has been allowed to gather up more of our own blessed energy sources, the economy gets better, more people working now than ever, minorities working at the highest, unemployment's the lowest it's ever been for minorities since they started recording those numbers. I mean, it's fantastic. And energy prices have come down a little, and it's been stabilized because we're finding so much of our own energy and using it. And we disagree about a lot of things on both sides of the aisle. I don't know anybody that serves in this body on either side of the aisle that doesn't want a clean environment. But those that know our history of the world know if you have a struggling economy, the number one thing that suffers, besides the people, is the environment. In China, that government, as big, totalitarian as it could be, they know if people get laid off and are not working, they could have another revolution, and they don't want that. They're more concerned about people being busy and working and having money than they are about the environment. In India, they are scared to death of people, too many people not being able to work or have income. So we get all of this pollution from the other side of the world. Heard today that 85%, somebody said, of the pollution in the atmosphere is that we have in our atmosphere coming from these other countries. When those countries' economies are struggling, there's more pollution. It's generally the way it works, because you just can't afford to help clean up the environment like we are and have been in the United States. We need a vibrant economy to continue to clean up our environment. We got lakes that were dead. now brimming with activity and with wildlife. These are good things. Texas, seems like our air gets cleaner every year. So I'd asked my staff to find a picture of, as best they could, that would reflect what we're talking about in ANWR, in that tiny, well, relatively speaking, tiny area of ANWR where drilling would be allowed. You don't see, and this is from Google Maps, and it's right near, this isn't actually the area, but it looks just like most of the area where drilling would be allowed. Time to time, there will be a lot of wildlife cross this area, and the area where drilling will be allowed, but they can't stay because they can't live there in those areas. It's just not enough to sustain life there. So as Jimmy Carter figured out, it's an ideal place to drill. And that's why they designated for that. But we have been waiting over 40 years to use that as a place to even further reduce our costs of energy, which will also allow us to export energy, which means European countries don't have to be blackmailed or extorted by Russia. I mean, there's one country that hopes the Democrats are very, very successful. Well, of course, the OPEC nations, but another, Russia, is probably the most hopeful that the Democrats are successful in preventing us from getting the energy that we've been blessed with in this area where you don't have caribou or things, wildlife like you do in other parts of ANWR. They don't want us to drill because they know we'll be able to get energy to Europe, and we won't blackmail Europe. We won't extort Europe the way that Putin often has countries that he supplies natural gas to. We export that. We can help give more freedom to the world. We can bring down our own prices even further. Why wouldn't we do that? But this picture was near the proposed exploration area. It's from Google Maps. It's taken on Dalton Highway just south of Prudhoe Bay. It's facing east toward the coastal area of the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. And so it's not right in the refuge, but it's a very fair representation of the coastal areas found within the refuge. So it's actually a more accurate depiction of the proposed exploration area than the images that we've been seeing around here about the mountains and rainbows and all the herds of animals. This is much more representative than any of those type pictures. I do want to touch on one more thing about the Russians meddling in our elections. And Sean Hannity had a great article a year and a half ago, February of 2018. And in there, he quotes from President Obama. And President Obama says, there is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections. There's no evidence that that's happened in the past or that there are instances in which that will happen this time. And that was at the height of the 2016 election. And so he goes on to say, so I invite Mr. Trump to stop whining and go try to make his case to get votes. So this was President Obama. He did nothing. And it turns out they knew that the Russians were trying to meddle in our election. So why wouldn't Obama try to stop the Russians from meddling in our election? He did nothing. I mean, there's speculation. Well, he knew that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and he was afraid if they started admitting what they knew was true, that Russia was trying to meddle in our elections, and then Hillary Clinton won, it might make her victory look suspect if they talked about the effort they knew Russia was engaged in to affect our election. But the truth is, Putin, he wants to divide America as much as he can. Divide and conquer is what he hopes to do. And he's been successful. The Russians that they had that gave the lies to Christopher Steele, the discredited former MI6 guy, that he provided to Fusion GPS that apparently the Clinton campaign and the DNC had hired. It's done what they wanted. It's done what Putin wanted. It has adversely affected the President of the United States. It's divided our country. It has pitted family against family. I mean, someone once said the last phase of a civil war involves guns, but we've been in a non-firearm civil war for a while now. And this Mueller investigation, you know, the whole Russia dossier, the lies in there about candidate, now President Trump, the Russians, just like Putin wanted, they have been successful in dividing this country. And as of yesterday, being 9/11, I mean, we can disagree, like John Dingell and I did, but I love the guy. He was a brilliant, caring, honorable man of integrity. And we have those on both sides of the aisle. Got some that you got to be careful on both sides, but there are people on both sides of the aisle. We can work together because they're honest, honorable people. Disagree when we need to. But I do need to touch on, before we finish the week here, of course, we've seen in the news Afghanistan, peace talks with the Taliban broke down. Taliban continue to kill Americans, and they're going to continue to kill Americans. It's who they are. It's what they are. And in my trips to Afghanistan and other places, I've made friends of some of those Muslims who were Afghan Muslims who were part of the Northern Alliance. It's no longer called the Northern Alliance, but these were Muslim friends of the United States. They just wanted their freedom. They're Muslims, but they did not want ruthless totalitarians like the Taliban running their country. And the enemy of our enemy was people we could work with. And unfortunately, our intelligence was not sophisticated enough, plugged in enough, so that the day or so before 9/11, when Ahmad Shah Massoud, sometimes called the Lion of Panjshir because he was such a hero. He was a great warrior, soldier. He was a great politician, beloved in Afghanistan, and the Taliban wanted to kill him, but he had good security. But the Taliban, they may be crazy, they may be haters, want to kill all Americans, but they're not stupid at all. And they knew if the United States figured out that the 9/11 attack had originated in Afghanistan with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, that the United States would come to Afghanistan and we'd look for an Afghan leader that the people would rally behind, who could lead the country to destroy the Taliban. And they knew that would most likely be the Lion of Panjshir, the hero of the Afghan victory over Russia, Ahmad Shah Massoud. So the day or so before 9/11, I think it was around 36 hours or so before, they had gotten Massoud to agree to an interview. His security people checked out the reporter, known reporter, cameraman there, let him in. And when they start the interview, the cameraman blows up the bomb in his camera and kills Massoud. If our intelligence people had been on top of their game, they would have known something's about to happen. Something's about to happen. For them to kill Massoud now, this national hero, Well, that Ahmad Shah Massoud has a brother, Ahmad Sia Massoud, and I think of him as a friend. I hope he thinks the same way. He fought with and under his older brother, and his brother used him as a diplomat, but he was one of many of the Northern Alliance. Movie 12 Strong shows General Dustin that we got after 9/11, getting around October, got other tribal groups to agree to fight with Dustin as the leader. Some of them weren't happy, but they agreed. And we provided air cover, and we provided weapons for them. We had 300 or so, as I've understood it, special ops, special forces, CIA in there. And only our guys could call down bombs and direct them at specific targets. And between the weapons we provided the Afghans, the bomb support from B-52s, 40,000 or so feet up, the Northern Alliance, our Afghan Muslim allies, they destroyed the organized Taliban, within, some say maybe it was March, but February, March of 2002, without a single American casualty, we had defeated the Taliban. Then I think it was a mistake. We were considered heroes. We came in, we helped get rid of the Taliban that a majority of Afghanistan did not want running the country. And then we came in and started what appeared to be occupying. And that probably could have been okay if we could have helped them get a new government going and then get out. Condoleezza Rice, as I heard from others, relied on recommendations to use a guy named Zal Khalilzad. Pashtun, you can be Pashtun, not be Taliban. He's not Taliban, but you can't be Taliban and not be Pashtun, as I understand it. And anyway, relied heavily on him. I talked to a guy that said he was part of the inner circle, and the recommendation is what kind of government are we going to give Afghanistan now that we've destroyed the Taliban? Unfortunately, that shouldn't have been our decision, but the people that said, look, this is a tribal country, nothing would fit this area better than to have strong local and state or province governments, and then that's a federalist society where the national government's kind of an umbrella, but the real power is in the provinces and the local government. That's not what we did. The wrong people were listened to, and we pushed a constitution through that gives the power to the president, almost make him a dictator. The president is elected in Afghanistan, but then he appoints the governors, he appoints the mayors, he appoints the police chief. It just cut the local folks and the province folks out of governing themselves. And as my friend Massoud said, look, we know you're going to end up having to pull out someday, so please help us get an amendment to our Constitution that allows each province to elect its own governor, allows each city, town to elect their own mayor. Let us pick our own police chiefs, not somebody that Karzai and now Ghani is president, but let us pick our own leaders. And the reasoning I thought was very sound. He said, when America leaves Afghanistan, with this strong central government where the president has all power, all they got to do is either knock off or corrupt the president, and they're right back in charge of Afghanistan. And you know the Taliban hate Americans, so they're going to come kill a bunch more once they take back over Afghanistan. And then you're going to have to come back and Americans die all over again for nothing. If you will simply allow us to have that local, provincial power, so we elect our own leaders and not have them appointed from Kabul, then, yeah, maybe the Taliban gets 1 or 2 provinces, but the rest of us can rise up like we did before and defeat the Taliban again. And you don't have to have Americans die like you have for all these years. That made sense. But the only trouble is the guy that helped get Afghanistan this ridiculous constitution that's created basically a totalitarian type presidency, that's who was negotiating with the Taliban. There are rumors that he wanted to be president of Afghanistan at one time himself. But regardless, this guy, he gave the Bush administration bad advice. He gave the Obama administration bad advice. They were trying to cut a deal with the Taliban. The Taliban, you can cut a deal with them, and then they're going to cut your throat the first chance they get. It makes no sense. But we have people from the Bush administration through the Obama administration, Khalilzad's still being listened to, and he wanted to do this deal with the Pashtun brothers, with the Taliban. We don't need to be dealing with our enemies. We need to be dealing with our allies. And this was one of the great dangers by rejecting those who lost family members, risked their own lives to help us take out the Taliban, eliminate the organized Taliban originally, without a single loss of American life. Why wouldn't we want to put them in positions of power? They can get elected if we just, and I said to Masood, I said, what makes you think we could help you amend your Constitution? And he says, you're still paying for most of our government operations. You threaten to pull out all that money prematurely? Yeah, we'll change the Constitution, but we need your help to do it so you don't have to keep losing American lives here in Afghanistan. It made so much sense, but unfortunately the deep state just continues to be deep, and Khalilzad has been part of that from the very beginning. Seemed like a nice guy when I met him in met him in Iraq back in 2005. Seemed like a nice guy. He's just the wrong person to be listened to. And Americans have continued to be killed while he's been wanting to have peace talks with the Taliban, not with the former Northern Alliance people that risked their lives, lost family members fighting with us and for us. Oh no, we're not going to deal with them. We're going to leave them. And all of the former Northern Alliance, they know. When we leave and we've cut a deal with the Taliban or leave things so that the Taliban can take right over again, they're all going to be killed. And then there isn't going to be anybody in Afghanistan who will be able to stand up and fight against the Taliban. And on top of that, even if there were, they wouldn't want to cut a deal with us because they will have seen the way the Northern Line risked and lost lives to help us defeat the Taliban. And what do? We leave them high and dry, allow the Taliban to come in and kill them when we go. No. We need to be talking to our friends who fought with us and got rid of all the organized Taliban by February, March of 2002, before we became occupiers, more or less. That needs to be a federalist system there. And we need our friends, our allies who fought the Taliban and don't want them back in positions of authority. And I think President Ghani would be willing to do that, but, deep state just keeps getting deeper. We need to negotiate with our friends so they're in a position to help our enemies not get back in control to kill Americans again. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields